Can't be late for this thing. Hey folks, Andrew McIndoe, Vice President of Development at the Heritage Foundation. Welcome to Washington, D.C. I kind of feel like I've got the whole city to myself these days. Why don't we go make our way to the virtual member summit? Come on, man. Here's the Progressive headquarters. I think there might be a swamp creature in there. It's one of those Green New Deal traffic cones. Ridiculous. You know, Heritage is always making good business decisions. While there are less people in the office and less noise interruptions, we're making a lot of progress on these construction projects. You know, I hate these things, but Mrs. James really doesn't like us to be late. All right, well, we've made it to the mothership here at the Heritage Foundation. So even though we've been largely virtual, people are still in and out of the office, and Heritage has been busier than ever. We're all about delivering impact to you, our Heritage members. Let's go inside. All right, one last stop before we go and kick off this awesome event where we've got some of the best and brightest from Heritage and a lot of the best conservative movement allies. I'm caffeinated now. Let's go up and meet Genevieve and get this thing started.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Heritage Foundation's Virtual Member Summit. I am Genevieve Wood, and I'm joining you live from our Daily Signal Media studio here at Heritage Headquarters on Capitol Hill. It is great to see so many of you have tuned in, and it looks like my co-host, Andrew McIndoe, made it here just in time. Hey, Andrew, are you there?
Hey, Genevieve, I am here. I did make it up to my office here on the 8th floor of the Heritage Foundation headquarters, the Saliba Family Foundation Executive Suite. I'm not hiding out in my basement, and it is great to be here, even as we practice social distancing and follow all the local guidelines during this pandemic. I am thrilled that so many Heritage members have joined us. We have an incredible event lined up, don't we, Genevieve?
Indeed, Andrew, we do. And during our time together today, we're going to introduce you to Heritage policy experts who continue to make strides to reopen the economy and schools, protect American ideals against revisionist history, and of course, ensure that Americans stay healthy. And we look forward to engaging with all of you throughout today's program. In fact, if you take a look at the screen now, you'll see how you can submit questions, how you can answer polls, and how you can use the chat wall on the right side to share your thoughts with us and your fellow Heritage members. So let me encourage you to go ahead and have everyone start using the chat box now to introduce themselves, and be sure to share where you're tuning in from. We want to see what cities and states are represented today.
I know we've got great turnout from across the country, coast to coast. So as everyone continues to introduce themselves in the chat, I want to take a minute to remind you to check out the event resource guide that you should have received via email. I've got mine printed out here, and we'll share a link right now in the chat as well. This guide will provide additional reading material and action items that each of you can take on today's topics. And I want to go ahead and highlight just one of those resources listed in your event guide. It's Solutions 2020, a fantastic look at conservative policy positions on the top issues of the day. We've sent a copy of this to every single candidate running for federal office to make sure that they know what good conservative solutions look like. I use it all the time. I keep a copy on my bookshelf behind me and know that you will find it useful as well. So make sure you look at that to keep it on hand. Now, throughout today's program, Genevieve and I are going to be sharing useful resources like Solutions 2020 and many others, and you can look through those during the program and certainly afterwards.
Yes, we will. And it's great to see the chat messages from our members rolling in right now from across the country. So I'm going to give a few shout outs here. Hello to Salon and Mariana Patterson from Atlanta, Georgia. Great to see Bo and Jeannie Cornell from Austin, Texas, my home state. And David Susan Jellison from Detroit Lakes, Minnesota. Thank you all for tuning in. And please, those of you just joining us, continue to share your thoughts with us throughout the day's program by commenting in the chat wall. And we are excited. You should know that over 2,000 Heritage members from all 50 states have registered for today's program. So truly representing all corners of our great country.
That is awesome. Great to hear. Well, as we open our time together, let's start things off right with our national anthem. Joining us today to sing is Heritage Academy fellow Chloe Schumacher. Now, the Academy is our new 12-week program to virtually train young conservative leaders across the nation. Chloe was one of the first 200 talented fellows in the inaugural class that just happened, and that class represented 38 states, 6 countries, and 120 universities. They are truly behind enemy lines. And we already have a second cohort of this academy underway this fall. Chloe, I should add, is a senior at the University of Missouri studying political science and history. She's a talented choral singer, as you are about to hear, and we're all proud Americans. So while we don't know what sports leagues, what anthem they're going to play this fall, you can sure bet that Heritage will play ours. Chloe, over to you.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Thank you, Chloe. We are glad to have you as a graduate of the Heritage Academy. Well, now let's take a look at what's coming up in the first part of our program today. We'll hear first from Heritage President Kay James about the impact you are having this year. Then from Jessica Anderson and Rob Bluey on our newly launched Fight for America campaign, followed by a strong panel of experts on law and order.
That's right, Genevieve. We have a great program planned for everyone. Thanks again for tuning in. Let's go ahead and get started with our first speaker. Since 2018, Kay Coles James has been at the helm of the Heritage Foundation. Her unparalleled experience in government, academia, and business has helped take Heritage to new heights of success. And even in the middle of this pandemic, Mrs. James's leadership has ensured that Heritage is staying influential. I've lost count of how many times she has visited the White House since March. So she's here with us today to share the most impressive Heritage accomplishments that you have made possible over the last few months and how we are leading going into the future. So Mrs. James, welcome to the Virtual Member Summit.
Thank you, Andrew. I want to also thank you and your team for putting this wonderful virtual member summit together. It's going to be a really exciting time with all the outstanding speakers you have lined up. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in the thick of the political campaign season. But with everything that's happening in America today, this November is no longer about winning or losing an election. It's about winning or losing a country. Over the summer, the forces of Marxism, socialism, and anarchy have terrorized our streets. They've threatened the values that make America the greatest nation on earth. We've watched as politicians, members of the media, and the celebrity class tacitly accept their behavior or even openly cheer it on. We've had a glimpse of our future if this country is handed over to the radical left. We've seen the rioting and the vandalism. We've witnessed the bullying of opponents into silence. Even the politicians on the left have said in no uncertain terms that they want to defund the police, abolish the Electoral College, pack the Supreme Court. They're talking about repealing the tax cuts that led to more job creation and prosperity than at any other time in history. And they want to take away our right to bear arms. They attack and minimize our religious liberty. They want to weaken our military as our biggest adversaries are expanding theirs. And they are expanding or want to expand socialism with every opportunity they can. On top of all of this country is fighting a virus and an unprecedented shutdown of the American economy like nothing we've ever seen before. And that's why I want to tell you about some of the incredible work that your heritage team is doing to not only fight the left, but to fight the coronavirus and engage on so many other critical issues facing America. Heritage and its media arm, the Daily Signal, continue to keep the American people informed about the latest developments. We've even created a step-by-step plan for governors and localities to end the riots, to bring the rioters to justice, and to restore the peace. We're also calling out the cancel culture, calling out those tearing down and rewriting our history, and calling out our schools and the media as they try to turn Americans against America. We're showing members of law enforcement across the nation how much we support them. And we've launched our Fight for America campaign to encourage people to defend, not defund, our heroic police. We're also working to protect the integrity of our elections by speaking out loudly about the potential for massive fraud with mail-in voting. And we're advising election officials how to conduct safe and secure elections this November. In the early stages of the pandemic, we created the National Coronavirus Recovery Commission, and we brought together experts from nearly every sector of our country's economy. Those experts developed over 250 recommendations to help the nation recover from both the economic and the health devastation caused by the coronavirus. The federal government, several foreign governments, governors, mayors, business owners, community leaders all around the country have been using those recommendations to fight the spread of the virus and to safely reopen their communities, their businesses, and their schools. Our team is looking at every coronavirus relief bill in Congress, and we're pushing to keep all relief targeted to only those who need it, to make it temporary and to make it fully transparent. We don't need American taxpayers bailing out states and cities that have been poorly run for decades by liberal leaders and doing it under the guise of coronavirus relief. And at the same time, Our national defense and our foreign policy experts are warning lawmakers not to let the coronavirus distract them from the dangers we continue to face abroad. There's so much more that our team is doing each and every day that I can't possibly get into it all here. And while other organizations may have to scale back during this unprecedented time in our history, Heritage continues to work to preserve this nation and ensure that we can look forward to a better tomorrow. But the only reason we've been able to be successful and to do battle on all these fronts is because of you. I've said it many times before, but the plain fact of the matter is, without you, there is no Heritage Foundation. But today, in light of all that's happening, I have to ask you to do one more thing, and that involves your time. Not much of it, but some of it. As you know, Heritage and Heritage Action for America have begun the Fight for America campaign. We're developing concrete steps that our members and other concerned Americans can take to ensure that statewide shutdowns, business closures, massive unemployment, riots, and racial unrest don't become the new normal for this nation. One of the major components in the Fight for America campaign is Heritage's Citizens Guide to 2020. When you sign up for the Citizens Guide, we'll give you key talking points on major issues. We'll link you to important articles that you can read and share on your social media networks or email to your friends. We'll give you ideas for writing a letter to the editor in your local newspaper. And we'll give you ideas for helping to get like-minded people registered to vote and to the polls. And there's so much more. Every 2 weeks, you'll receive new ideas. If each one of our members does at least one item every 2 weeks over the next 2 months, we can reach millions of people with conservative solutions. The idea for the Citizens Guide was inspired by a Heritage member named Dick Shirk out of Atlanta. Dick attended one of our Heritage events and left feeling really motivated. And he told me after that he wanted to do something right then and there, but he didn't know what. And that's how the Citizens Guide project got started. I want you to know that we listen to your feedback and we take it very seriously. Thank you, Dick, for inspiring this project. This is such an important project that I'm encouraging every single one of our members to participate, and you'll hear more about it throughout the day. As I said before, the Citizens Guide is part of a larger Heritage and Heritage Action Fight for America joint campaign. Coming up next to explain more about that campaign are Executive Director of Heritage Action for America, Jessica Anderson, and Heritage's Vice President of Communications, Rob Bluey. Before I turn things over to them, though, I want to express my deepest appreciation for all that you are doing. America needs our help to once again be a nation with a future better than its past. She needs our help to once again be a nation where freedom and prosperity flourish, where opportunity abounds, and where civil society brings out the best in all of us. To once again be a nation of free enterprise, limited government, and traditional American values. These are the principles that have been preserved by the blood and sacrifice of generations before us. And these are the same principles we must defend for future generations. It's time to do more than we've ever done before to stand up for these principles, because there's too much at stake to stand on the sideline. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the time to fight for America. Thank you for being with us today, and thank you for standing up for this great nation so that you and I can pass on to our children and our grandchildren a nation that's at least as free as the one that we inherited.
Thank you so much, Mrs. James. My name is Jessica Anderson, and I'm the Executive Director of Heritage Action. And it's great to be with you all today. Thank you so much for letting Rob and I into your homes to share such important updates about the state of our country and the profound impact your Heritage and Heritage Action teams are having in the fight over the future of our country. As you know, Heritage Action is the grassroots organization created to mobilize Americans around the country in support of the conservative policy positions of the Heritage Foundation. We work to lead both the grassroots and influence policymakers here in Washington. Today, as you all know, grassroots leadership is needed more than ever. We have challenges as a nation that we have not faced before. And specifically, we must do all that we can as a movement to beat the left in their overreach into American society, education, and public policy. These challenges are on the minds of voters this year, and Heritage Action has been on the ground since April 1st, answering those questions through the work we call Project 2020. Let me give you some of the latest metrics. Since April 1st, we have reached over 2.5 million swing voter households. That's right, 2.5 million swing voter households. We have a team of 200 well-trained grassroots leaders who are spread out across this country in strategic states. Of the 2.5 million voters we have reached so far, we've added 3,000 new sentinels to our ranks and over 100,000 new grassroots activists for our rapid response team. Clearly, our message is striking a chord with those Americans who want safety and security in our neighborhoods, oppose big government, and continue to fight for conservative principles. But friends, our work is not yet done. We have 49 days until November 3rd, and we are laser focused on two things: exciting the base of grassroots supporters and mobilizing these 2.5 million new converts from Project 2020. We can't do this alone. And the partnership between Heritage and Heritage Action, it's really never been better, has it, Rob?
That's right, Jessica. Thank you for sharing those impressive goals with us. We are committed to fighting for America. And as you all know, it's a critical moment in our nation's history as we find our country under attack from radical leftists. Our cities and monuments are being destroyed, our history is being distorted, and our right to speak the truth is being challenged. Conservatives are worried, and we're frustrated, and we all want something to do about it, which is why the Heritage Enterprise is working together to combat the left in every corner of the debate with 4 specific goals in mind. Number 1, advocate for American values and institutions in the face of radical extremism.
Number 2, bolster community support for law enforcement officers.
Number 3, call for accountability in education and for education dollars to be returned to taxpayers during the pandemic.
And number 4, emphasize that the way to fight for America is to vote for America.
Jessica and I are going to briefly touch on each of these 4 pillars and the specific impact that we're having. First, we believe that advocating for American values starts with each one of us. That's why, as Mrs. James just announced, we are launching the new Heritage Initiative called Citizens Guide to Fight for America. Starting today, we are inviting millions of patriotic Americans to join us. And each week from now until Election Day, they will receive specific Heritage recommended action items, enabling them to grow your own understanding of the biggest issues facing our nation and to fight for American values. We've constructed a website at heritage.org/2020 with the steps that you can take to get started. And we've built some tools on that website to help you. First, talking points on key issues so that you can be informed when talking to your friends, family, or sharing posts on social media. 2, advice from our talented communication staff on crafting a strong and winning message. And 3, tips for writing a successful letter to the editor or an op-ed for your local newspaper. Here's a short video with some more information.
America is at a crossroads. Each day we see the penalties of progressive policies across our nation, while night after night our city streets are set ablaze by riots and rage. That's why the Heritage Foundation has developed a plan to help take our country back. The Citizen's Guide to Fight for America provides a series of Heritage-recommended action items delivered to you each week. Make an impact in your community and in our country. Sign up for the Citizen's Guide at heritage.org/2020 and join in the fight for America today.
Wow, the work of the Citizen's Guide is going to be so important, and it reflects how we can support our American values and institutions on a daily basis. But friends, the second pillar in the fight for America is what I want to talk about next. This is how we can support law enforcement. As we have all seen, police officers are under attack everywhere. For the hundreds of millions of Americans, much like Rob and I, who rely on the police to keep our neighborhoods safe, it really has been surreal to see politicians and pundits on the left declare that the real instigators of the violence are the police and not the gangs or rioters. The American people want safety, security, and a clear vision on how to quell the violence and restore the peace. That's why 3 weeks ago, we launched the Police Pledge. We were with Vice President Mike Pence in Des Moines, Iowa, to ask the American people to pledge their support for law enforcement. As the left continues to abandon the police, the teams of Heritage and Heritage Action have run to the sound of the gun. Here's a quick video about the pledge if you missed our event.
One individual hurled a gasoline bomb into the city-county building, which holds the city's 9/11 dispatch center and jail.
We have all seen the lawlessness and the anarchy that is played out in our country's cities, in our neighborhoods. Today, we launch Fight for America, going on offense to advocate for American values and institutions in the face of radical extremism, continuing our support to champion the law enforcement.
I work with exceptional deputies, police officers, troopers. We have people that truly want to get out there and do good. I'm very happy that the Heritage Foundation and Heritage Action are willing to stand up, are willing to speak for the silent majority.
Security is the foundation of our prosperity. You have a president, you have an administration that are committed to law and order and to supporting men and women who serve on the thin blue line.
With the Police Pledge, we are able to use our unique role at Heritage Action to encourage our leaders at all levels of government to stand up for the safety and security of the American people. Yesterday, we did something big. We unveiled billboards the size of city blocks in Times Square, Dallas, Texas, and Atlanta, Georgia, with a very clear and simple message: no police, no peace. Why did we do this? Well, we want to send a clear message to elected officials and the American people that the silent majority supports law enforcement. And without their work in our neighborhoods, this country cannot have true peace. So with the Police Pledge and the Billboard campaign, we are working hard to support our men and women in blue. But Rob, there's still more work to be done, and that work is at our schools. Right, Rob?
As a parent of 2 elementary school kids who have been stuck in virtual learning since March, I can certainly sympathize with anyone who is displeased with the current circumstances and looking for changes. But the struggle is not just virtual schooling. Fight for America is pushing back against the left's attempt to indoctrinate our children with efforts like the 1619 Project.
If you don't already know about the 1619 Project, you should be prepared for it to come to a school near you. It's a left-wing idea that would fundamentally transform our understanding of America's founding. Rather than celebrating 1776, the New York Times and its left-wing allies have prepared propaganda for schools to promote a radically different version of American history. Shortly after the 1619 Project made its debut last year, Heritage responded by pointing out the inaccuracies. We have put resources directly in the hands of parents to hold their school boards accountable and demand that the 1619 Project not be taught in our nation's classrooms. So, with that, the fourth pillar of Fight for America is probably the most important. It simply states, to fight for America is to vote for America. Rob, I think you've got some exciting news for our members to hear about.
We sure do, Jessica. We have developed 3 television ads to air this fall on national cable TV outlets as well as digital platforms. Our goal is to reach millions of people, 100 million or more in all. And we've decided to go big with these ads because we know how much is at stake. We want to paint a clear contrast between the left's vision for America and the conservative values of freedom and opportunity that we know will lead to a better future. The ads will begin airing the week of October 5th, and they will continue through Election Day. Now, over the course of those 4 weeks, we'll air the spots nearly 100 times on cable TV and thousands more on websites and streaming platforms. We want to make sure that we're mobilizing both our conservative supporters who watch Fox News, as well as persuade independents who watch the History Channel, Discovery, and HGTV. Now, let's take a look at the ads.
Let's take a field trip. First stop, Venezuela, a socialist paradise. Next, Cuba, North Korea. The list is long. The results are always the same. And now the virus is spreading. It's not just failed government, but failed ideas. There's a better way to make progress and improve the well-being of every American. We call it freedom. It's time we fight for America and vote for America. Let's take a quick history lesson. Just 2 centuries ago, 94% of the people in the world lived in extreme poverty. Today, it's 8.5%. In a century, our life expectancies more than doubled. How did we come so far so fast? The freedom to create, to start a business, to keep what you earn. Don't let the socialists and radical left cost us our progress, our freedom, and our well-being. It's time we fight for America and vote for America. If you want to see one version of our future, visit Portland, a living laboratory of all the bad ideas progressives have ever had, including perhaps the scariest of all, defunding our police. Who are you going to call when you need protection? A social worker? A community activist? The left is full of ideas that never work. Don't let them bring Portland to you. It's time we fight for America and vote for America.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed watching those ads, and we'll see them on a network soon. I'd like to close our session today by reminding all of you that Heritage and Heritage Action will not cease in the work that we do or stray from the principles that guide us. It is because of supporters like you and your generous contributions that we can fight for America.
This is the time for leadership, and there's no better place prepared for this fight than the Heritage Enterprise. Thank you.
Thanks, Jessica. And to our Heritage members with us today, we'd love to hear which of these 4 pillars of our Fight for America campaign resonates most strongly with you. As we transition to our next session, share what your thoughts with us by answering the poll on the left side of your screen. Just click the poll tab to see the question and submit your answer. Which Fight for America pillar do you feel most passionate about? Is it number 1, advocate for American values and institutions in the face of radical extremism? 2, bolster community support for law enforcement officers? 3, call for accountability in education and for education dollars to be returned to taxpayers during the pandemic? Or 4, emphasize that the way to fight for America is to vote for America. You are an important part of the fight for America, so we'd love to hear from you now. A key part of the fight for America is supporting our law enforcement officers, and this has become more important than ever before because we've seen the violent riots that are wreaking havoc in our cities across the country. In our next session, we're going to talk about what's happening and how we can bring an end to the violence and restore law and order. As we start our session on ending violent riots, I'd like to invite 2 of my colleagues, Laura Reese and Chris Rufo, to join us. Laura Reese is a senior research fellow specializing in Homeland Security issues at Heritage. She came to Heritage after working at the Department of Homeland Security as acting deputy chief of staff, among other roles. Chris Rufo recently joined Heritage as a visiting fellow. He's also the director of the Center on Wealth and Poverty at the Discovery Institute in Seattle and a contributor to City Journal. Laura and Chris, thanks for being here today. Now, we just shared with our members various ways that we are fighting for America. And both of you know what we are up against in this country right now. Let's take a look at a new Heritage Foundation video to see some of the images playing out on our streets. Laura, this summer you helped us write an action plan for stopping the violence happening in America's cities, and we just saw some of those steps on that video. Who is training and supporting these rioters, and why are they doing it?
So, what seems to be clear is these riots are organized. When the Portland riots have been going on for over 108 consecutive nights, it's obvious that the rioters are being paid to do this. And when we see stockpiles of dangerous equipment, tools, shields appear for these riots night after night, it's clear that they're organized. Black Lives Matter and Antifa are consistently active in each of these riots around the US. And as far as who's funding them, it seems to be a range from celebrities and corporations who fund Black Lives Matter in the belief that they're furthering social justice to others who seemingly have more suspect motives. We know, for example, George Soros's Open Society Foundation announced $220 million this summer for racial equality in America. These organizations, they want to change not just the criminal system, but America as we know it, to their more elusive socialist aims. Heritage has requested that the Justice Department investigate and prosecute this organized crime under the RICO statute, and we believe that that is occurring where possible. So hopefully we will start to see individual organizers and funders named and prosecuted.
Now, Chris, you've witnessed firsthand some of the anarchy that's taking place when left-wing protesters transformed a portion of a neighborhood around an abandoned police precinct in Seattle into what was known as the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, or CHAZ. What was it like?
Yeah, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, which I reported on extensively, was an experiment in governance by social justice. It was a 6-block area. They had seized it from the local Seattle government and police department, and they essentially erected a society on the principles of social justice. And what you saw was that it started with a kind of utopian vision, but it descended into a nightmare very quickly. It started implementing racial segregation. So they had segregated facilities. If you were a person of color or if you were white, based again on this kind of critical race theory, social justice conceptualization. But despite the fact that they had basically blocked police from entering to create this kind of safe space and autonomous zone, it became very violent. Actually, 6 Black men were shot, 2 fatally, during the 20-something day existence of the Chaz, making it the most deadly neighborhood in America, with shooting deaths more than 50 times greater than the city of Chicago.
Laura, we're seeing the impact that these effects are having on police departments. Most recently, several top officers in Rochester, New York, and their police force either resigned or retired early. Should we be worried about what the leadership void in police departments and other problems with recruiting might pose for our long-term impact when it comes to policing and law enforcement?
It's a real issue. I mean, in addition to seeing defund the police efforts in New York and elsewhere, police are literally being ambushed. We saw that this weekend in Los Angeles with the shooting. Support has fallen for police in multiple cities. And America now sees what city life is like without police. Crime goes up, businesses close, citizens move out. Americans want to be safe and they want to live and thrive in communities. And they need local leaders who will lead from the front and develop such communities where people can live and thrive and where police are supported. It's an honorable profession and it needs to be treated accordingly.
Chris, going back to you, some of your investigative reporting has exposed the prevalence of taxpayer-funded government trainings on topics such as critical race theory and white privilege. And you've had some impressive results as a result of that reporting. Let's take a look at this clip from Tucker Carlson tonight.
Last week, we interviewed a journalist called Chris Rufo, who's been investigating the spread of critical race theory in the federal government. He's been doing this virtually alone. The rest of the press corps has ignored it. Rufo told us that even the FBI is now holding weekly Maoist critical race struggle sessions, which is shocking if you think about it. Watch.
Critical race theory has actually now infiltrated our criminal justice system. Just this week, I released a story that the FBI is now holding weekly seminars on intersectionality, which is a hard left academic theory that reduces people to a network of racial, gender, and sexual orientation identities that intersect in complex ways and determine whether you are an oppressor or oppressed.
So that interview, along with a lot of Chris Rufo's other highly detailed reporting from the past several months, apparently got the attention of the president, and he acted. It also prompted a flood of tips for Rufo from workers at federal agencies, the ones currently being told they're evil for the way they look. Most had kept silent about what they were going through. They felt they had no choice but to endure it. But they do have a choice. This is wrong, and we should say so loudly. Americans are starting to realize that. Now, the White House, as we said, has responded to their pleas.
Chris, how did you first discover this, and what have you learned from some of those whistleblowers who have reached out to you? Can you share some examples with us of what's going on?
Yeah, I first discovered it from an anonymous tip email. I've done public records requests, and then once I released my first story, I started getting a flood of tipsters and whistleblowers from across every level of government. And they were sharing things that they had white privilege training where they were forced to denounce themselves to their colleagues. The Sandia National Nuclear Laboratories held a 3-day re-education camp for white males, asking them how to deconstruct their white male culture. But the really critical thing here is that critical race theory that's informing these trainings is also animating the violence that you see on the streets. The direct line from the kind of philosophical underpinnings of critical race theory to the violent riots and destruction that you see in cities like Seattle, Portland, New York, and Los Angeles. It is the same kind of neo-Marxist philosophical platform that is not only infiltrating our public institutions, but is causing tremendous chaos and destruction on our streets.
Laura, the Trump administration recently issued a directive to cease and desist this training, as we heard in that clip. Where have you seen government officials and others take steps that are needed at this time? And where have they failed, and do they need to step up their efforts?
So, in terms of the riots, some of these cities offer quite a contrast. If you look at, say, Kenosha and Milwaukee, where the state and local leaders there called in the National Guard, the riots there stopped very quickly. Contrast those cities with Portland, where the riots have gone on for 108 consecutive nights. And you look at the leadership in Portland and Oregon, they give tepid lip service to condemning the violence. They won't name the organizations that are doing it, like Black Lives Matter and Antifa. And if you're not going to name the organizations, how are you going to fight and stop their activities? It takes political will, it takes leadership from the front, not the back, and it takes cooperation at all levels of government, state, local, and federal. There is a way to stop these riots in Portland, but it requires the local leadership there to call in the National Guard, and this can end very quickly, as we've seen in other cities.
Chris, you just made the point that these training programs on critical race theory do have consequences, and we're seeing that in the streets with these violent protests. Can you go deeper into that connection and how you have seen it play out in real life?
Yeah, it's all you have to do is really listen to the speeches and communications of the people who are riding the streets. They're very explicit with their platform. It's no longer a kind of bait and switch rhetoric. It is inspired by kind of neo-Marxist thought. So they view the world as kind of capitalist oppressors versus a working class and people of color who are oppressed. And they make it explicit. They want to kind of liberate the world from not only capitalism, but from the United States, from the Constitution, from the Bill of Rights. They reject wholesale the kind of fundamental order of the United States. They condemn the US as a fundamentally racist and oppressive country. And they want to usher in a utopia. We saw that experiment play out in the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. It failed miserably, as every utopian experiment has in the last 150 years. And yet they're still there, hammering away at law enforcement with the kind of express kind of support or the tacit permission from local leaders. It's something extremely dangerous. And I think if we let it go on for too long, it could have catastrophic consequences.
Laura, you mentioned George Soros earlier. He and his organization have made a sustained effort to elect local prosecutors who, in many cases, just outright refuse to prosecute certain crimes. What are the consequences that we're now seeing of their failure to act?
Yeah, this seems to be a relatively new phenomenon, but unfortunately it's spreading throughout the US. The effect is these rioters who may be arrested, the prosecutors refuse to prosecute them because they agree with the cause. And so the rioters are let out of jail the next morning and then they return the next night to riot again. And without imposing any consequences, these riots escalate, they spread to other cities, and it continues. There needs to be consequences, there needs to be prosecutions. And if the state prosecutors aren't going to prosecute, there are also federal crimes that are being broken. And so the Justice Department is investigating more of this. We are starting to see more indictments at the federal level, and hopefully we will see more prosecutions at the federal level, and they can work their way up the food chain and again identify the people who are organizing these riots and funding them and bring this to a complete stop.
And Chris, a question that's probably on the minds of many Americans: what are some of the things that you would advise our attendees to do, Heritage members, if they see these things happening in their community? Can they take action, and what would you recommend?
Yeah, as far as the kind of critical race theory inspired trainings, if you're a federal employee, that is now forbidden. So you should immediately contact your inspector general, contact me, contact Heritage. And if you're seeing activities that are you feel might be a violation of civil rights laws, there is a kind of increasingly become a case that some of these trainings that teach racial stereotypes, that scapegoat or demean people on the basis of race, are actually violations of the Civil Rights Act. So I'm hoping to see in the next 3 to 6 months some lawsuits emerge on these trainings because we have to figure out how to stop them, because they are impacting not only the agencies at the highest level of the federal government, but local school districts all over the country.
Well, Laura and Chris, I want to thank you both for joining us. Your work is clearly having an impact, not only in Washington, but in states and communities all around this country. It just goes to show the important work that Heritage is doing. Thanks so much. And now back over to Andrew and Genevieve.
Rob, thank you very much. Chris and Laura, thank you very much as well. Those are obvious, some very serious threats to our nation's stability. And thank you for standing up to protect our American ideals. And for anyone here today who wants to join the fight for America, Heritage's brand new Citizens Guide, which you heard about from Mrs. James, Rob, and Jessica earlier, is a powerful tool that will equip you to make an impact in your community and in our country. All right, everyone, we're next going to break down some of the ideological underpinnings of the unrest we're seeing. Andrew, who are we hearing from next?
Genevieve, I'm happy to introduce Joe LeConte to everybody this afternoon. One of the most energetic and compelling speakers I've met, so I know that everybody online today is going to be fired up from his talk. Joe is the new director of Heritage's B. Kenneth Simon Center for American Studies, and he's going to talk just on what you said, the decline of civic culture in America and what we can do to fix it. He was previously a history professor at the King's College, a visiting professor at Pepperdine University, and a senior fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. But before he joins us, let's watch a little disturbing video that just shows one example of how civic culture has eroded with the left protesting our Independence Day, the 4th of July.
Why is the left suddenly so open with their disdain and scorn for America? The founders of this nation enabled us to live in the most free and prosperous country on earth, risking their lives, standing up to tyranny, and starting an experiment in democracy that would spread all over the world.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
But this Independence Day, instead of joining their fellow countrymen in the celebration of this incredible achievement, radical leftists decided to mark the day denouncing America. Former NFL player Colin Kaepernick tweeted about Independence Day, quote, "We reject your celebration of white supremacy and look forward to liberation for all." Should we be surprised this sentiment is growing? These are the same people who celebrate the 1619 Project, which aims to completely reframe American history. They call for defunding police, but turn a blind eye when violent crime and murder rates skyrocket in the inner cities. They are open about their desire to disrupt the nuclear family. They are the mobs tearing down and defacing monuments. They claim that our country is systemically racist. Even when President Trump made his speech in front of a beloved national monument, highlighting the goodness of America and the potential we have when united under the purpose of freedom and liberty for all, the media said his remarks were dark and divisive. Now, things have been trending this way for years. But why now is the left suddenly so open with their disdain and scorn for America? Is it the culture? Is it the media? Is it our education system? Or do they disagree with the current president so much that they stand against anything he supports?
We must protect and preserve our history, our heritage, and our great heroes.
Whatever it is, we need to stand up. We need to fight back against this false narrative about America. We need to educate our children now about the principles of freedom, opportunity, and a thriving civil society for all. Before it's too late.
Within weeks after Germany invaded Poland on September 1st, 1939, triggering the Second World War and throwing the survival of Western civilization into doubt, Oxford's scholar C.S. Lewis delivered a sermon at St. Mary the Virgin Church. The pews were packed with anxious congregants, college professors, and students. The title of Lewis's talk was Learning in Wartime, Lewis himself was a combat veteran in the First World War. He fought in the trenches in France. And after the war, he returned to a world awash in cynicism and disillusionment. He lived through the 1920s and 30s and saw the rise of the most destructive ideologies in human history: socialism, communism, fascism, eugenics, totalitarianism. And now, with all of that experience, all of the threats at hand, Lewis pleads with his audience to maintain an intimate knowledge of the past. Without such knowledge, he warns, they would be vulnerable to the great cataract of nonsense that pours from the press and the microphone of their age. Well, those words have become a prophecy. The crisis unfolding on the streets of America today, the cancel culture, the mob violence, the attacks on our statues and monuments, the assault on our most cherished democratic symbols and ideals, this is a crisis of memory. History, of course, is remembering. And how we remember our past has a profound effect today on our politics, our culture, our democratic freedoms and way of life. George Orwell put it this way: he who controls the past controls the future. Without exaggeration, we are in an Orwellian moment. The radical left is engaged in a vast campaign to manipulate, to falsify the nation's past in order to implement their socialist, utopian vision of the future. And their campaign, steeped in a culture of victimization, represents the greatest threat to our democratic freedoms since the Second World War. This is not a debate about whether we should defund the police. It's an attempt to delegitimize the American Declaration and the Constitution. It's about canceling the American experiment. So what can we do about it? At the Heritage Foundation, at the Fulner Institute, it is all hands on deck. Bad history and bad thinking have to be countered with honest history, clear thinking, and persuasive storytelling. That's why we've recruited a team of visiting scholars, political scientists, economists, historians to push back against the madness. And they're doing this through books, essays, op-eds, conferences, media appearances, documentary films, and congressional testimony. In other words, by every means possible. We're also taking their scholarship and adapting it and putting it in the hands of ordinary citizens. We're giving American families the civic tools they need to educate themselves and their children about the history of the American founding and everything it stands for. And we're delivering a lecture series to congressional staff and to all of our interns. We call it the First Principles series, meaning we give these young staffers and college students a thorough understanding of the political principles of our democratic republic. We are making sure that these young patriots learn about the threats to these first principles and how they, in their future careers in politics, business, or law, can fight back. And we need to fight back because there's so much at stake. Our weapons include a commitment to truth-telling and a rich and authentic account of our history. Now, why does that matter? Because truth itself has become a casualty in this culture war. And the truth about the American creed, about American exceptionalism, is under assault. Future leaders need to understand the past. The Roman historian Titus put it this way: the study of history is the best medicine for a sick mind. Well, a prime reason why the progressive left has become so sickened and degraded by resentment and rage. It's their sheer ignorance of the staggering achievements of the United States in building a just, prosperous, and stable democracy. The American Declaration, for the first time in history, proclaimed that a nation was coming into existence as the sworn enemy of human slavery, and no other political revolution in the history of mankind ever made such a claim. With your help, we're going to remind Americans of this history and of these achievements. America's greatest leaders have returned to these truths again and again in times of crisis. When he was in a jail cell in Birmingham, Alabama, fighting for his civil rights, the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. appealed to the most sacred values in our Judeo-Christian heritage. His words, not mine. King never gave up on American democracy. Instead, he sought to bring the nation back to those great wells of democracy, he said, that were dug deep by the founding fathers of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. Dr. King refused to join the mob. We will reach the goal of freedom in Birmingham and all over the nation, he said, because the goal of America is freedom. The goal of America is freedom. Yes, America is still the land of hope. Now I'm going to leave you with a powerful video of Beth Feely, a part of Heritage's Restoring America's Civic Culture.
My name is Beth Feely, and I am a mom with a cause, which has led to my involvement in both local and national movements to restore civics in America. A few years ago, friends and I banded together to address a day-long program of indoctrination on critical race theory at New Trier High School, where my kids attend. It became a national news story covered in the Wall Street Journal. And while our parent group was successful in raising awareness, we learned the hard way the value of having a network in place. And so we started New Trier Neighbors, a citizen group that educates our area about what's happening in schools and local government. Through the New Trier experience, I also connected with Robert Woodson of the Woodson Center and helped him launch 1776 Unites, a group of mostly Black authors and scholars such as Shelby Steele, Glenn Lowry, and Carol Swain, as well as grassroots leaders from around America's inner cities, who all believe that the Black story in America revolves around the ideas of resilience and achievement against the odds, and the embrace of America's values, not grievance and revolution. And through both of these endeavors, I'm thrilled to work with the Heritage Foundation's Restoring Civics initiative. They're bringing back a renewed focus on keeping our republic. I think Benjamin Franklin would be proud. Restoring civics requires engagement. And as my journey shows, your involvement in a local issue could lead to your involvement in a national movement. And that's what we need more of to keep America a land of hope and opportunity for all.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Beth, for sharing your very personal and powerful story. Well, I know we're all laser focused on the 2020 elections right now, but clearly there's so much more to do to strengthen our civil society and advance conservative principles in the long haul. And for anyone who's a parent, one way to take Joe's advice to heart is to check out our brand new Parent's Guide to Education. And after you've read it, we hope you will share it with others. You'll see the link in our chat wall on the right side of your screen and in the event resource guide. Now, Andrew, I know as a parent yourself, the Parent's Guide is something that you believe is a great resource for those who want to restore the civic health of our communities.
Yeah, Genevieve, that's exactly right. It is. And you've met my 3-year-old daughter, Charlotte. And so as we make decisions about her future education, I know that that booklet is going to be a helpful resource. Well, after hearing from a handful of outstanding heritage policy experts, we want to invite a very special guest from the Trump administration to join us as our next speaker. We have with us now the acting Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Chad Wolf. Since his appointment in 2019, Secretary Wolf has led the efforts to secure our border, reform our immigration system, and help protect the integrity of our elections. In recent months, Secretary Wolf has also been focused on keeping our communities safe and putting an end to the reckless violence that we've seen. So please join me in welcoming to the Virtual Members Summit, Acting Secretary Chad Wolf.
Thank you, Andrew, for that introduction. It's great to join Heritage virtually and to have this opportunity to discuss the historic efforts President Trump and the Department of Homeland Security has made over the years. Nearly 4 years ago, the American people elected President Trump with a mandate to deliver strong borders and enact an America First immigration policy and to restore the rule of law. As Acting Secretary, I'm proud to say DHS is doing exactly that and much more. Today, I'd like to share some of the great progress DHS has made in establishing strong, effective border security and restoring integrity to our immigration system. But first, I'd like to take a moment to recognize Heritage President Kay Cole James for her leadership of this outstanding organization. Thank you for everything that you do to build America where freedom, opportunity, and prosperity flourish. Since 1965, more than 60 million new Americans have made the United States their home, making us the most welcoming nation in the world. Each year, we grant legal permanent resident status to more than 1 million aliens seeking to do things the right way, join our family, and create a better life in the land of opportunity. We also grant protection to tens of thousands of refugees and asylees, many of whom are eligible to participate in generous public assistance programs to ensure they have the tools they need to succeed in our country. In fact, since the U.S. refugee program began in 1980, the U.S. has admitted more than 3.7 million refugees, demonstrating our commitment to providing humanitarian relief to the world's most vulnerable populations. However, to sustain public confidence and remain the most generous nation, we must maintain the rule of law at the border and throughout the immigration system. At DHS, we're committed to doing exactly that. From the early days of this administration, President Trump articulated what most Americans intuitively knew. We need strong border security, and we need to put an end to the longstanding fraud and abuse in our immigration system. These are difficult issues that require difficult decisions, and many administrations, Republican and Democrat alike, have chosen not to act over the years, only weighing in when a crisis occurs and criticizing from the sidelines. From day one, the administration tried to work with Congress to address vulnerabilities at our border and in our immigration system. And after years of little to no progress, the administration has taken extraordinary steps to address these complex challenges using existing authorities available to us. This administration understands that it's better to stop criminal activity before it gets to America. And that means pushing out our borders and keeping America safe through a layered approach that includes more effective screening of those seeking entry into our country, securing unprecedented international cooperation, and building a state-of-the-art border wall system and imposing appropriate consequences on all those who break the law. One of the most fundamental responsibilities of any sovereign nation is to know exactly who is entering their country and for what purpose. In fulfilling that duty, DHS, along with our interagency partners, developed a process for evaluating the information sharing cooperation, identity management practices, and travel-related risk associated with each country in the world. We identified the lowest performing countries, put them on notice, and for those unable or unwilling to meet our standards, we issued common sense travel restrictions. And because of this process, we've seen multiple countries begin sharing information with us that they have never done so before. In short, we single-handedly raised the security baseline of the world. And that is the example of American leadership, and one you won't learn from the media's misleading coverage of our travel restrictions. Additionally, our unprecedented asylum cooperative agreements with the Central American countries of El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala are helping to stem illegal migration flows by allowing migrants to seek protections closer to home. In 2019, President Trump also reached a groundbreaking agreement with the government of Mexico to step up its efforts along known migrant routes, and we will continue to work with them to this day on partnerships to reduce illegal crossings. All of these actions and historical diplomatic achievements are creating a safer border, safer communities, and safer neighborhoods for Americans to live in. At the border and within a COVID environment, DHS is implementing a CDC order that suspends the introduction of persons crossing the border illegally for public health reasons. Under the CDC order, CBP is currently returning approximately 90% of individuals who would otherwise be kept in CBP facilities back to Mexico within 2 hours, drastically reducing the number of aliens held in congregate settings at the border while protecting DHS personnel, American communities, as well as the migrants themselves. I'm also proud to say that after decades of neglect, our nation's long-awaited border wall system is being constructed at an astonishing rate. The American people and our Border Patrol have been asking for this for far too long, and I'm proud to stand alongside President Trump and deliver the security our people demand and deserve. Having a secure border used to be a common-sense, bipartisan approach to Homeland Security. And although politics may have changed, the facts have not. They cannot. The results speak for themselves. Where effective border wall systems have been constructed, the number of illegal crossings and crime over time have gone down. Since President Trump took decisive action and declared our border crisis a national emergency, we have constructed the wall with unprecedented speed. Since January, we have constructed more than 320 miles of new border wall system, with another 260 miles currently under construction. These structures are placed in areas where they are needed most and severely impede the efforts of those seeking to enter America illegally and to do us harm. We expect to complete roughly 450 miles by the end of this calendar year. That's 450 miles of new border wall system that make illegal drug and human smuggling into our country much more difficult. Every new constructed mile provides America with the ability to decide where border crossings take place, not the cartels and not the human traffickers. The wall pushes cartels to traffic their goods at locations precisely where DHS is best equipped, at ports of entry. And that is where we have the resources to better detect and interdict the deadly contraband and victims of human trafficking. Currently, we are working to deploy non-intrusive inspection equipment at our ports of entry. And by 2023, we expect to expand the screening of commercial vehicles from 15% today to 72%, and the screening of personal vehicles from 1% to 40%. To further address the issue of child smuggling, DHS has taken steps to better detect and prevent family fraud at our border. Through a new fraud detection program, DHS is further denying the ability of cartels to exploit vulnerable and innocent children when seeking to illegally enter the United States. The Family Fraud Initiative was launched by ICE and Border Patrol last year and helps identify individuals who say they are families when seeking asylum in order to game the system and avoid lengthy detention. Since the initiative began, investigators have identified 238 fraudulent families and 50 individuals fraudulently claiming to be unaccompanied minors. They've seized 329 false documents that were used to support fraudulent asylum claims and have prosecuted more than 350 individuals for various crimes, including human trafficking, making false statements, conspiracy, and illegal reentry after removal. The department has also begun implementing a plan to collect DNA from certain non-U.S. persons in DHS custody by the end of this year. The DNA will be placed in the Combined DNA Index System database and compared against DNA recovered from crime scenes nationwide. This will help resolve unsolved crimes and prevent some of the most violent criminals from committing additional crimes. The DNA Fingerprint Act of 2005 required this practice be put in place, and the Trump administration is enforcing this law to make America safer. Trump administration's layered approach to immigration policy extends far beyond our efforts overseas and at the border. We are also making real reforms and restoring integrity to our broken immigration system. Through a series of regulatory and policy changes, this administration has effectively ended the practice of catch and release. By mobilizing our resources and standing up new and innovative capabilities such as the migrant protection protocols, we have been able to transform our dysfunctional immigration system despite inaction from Capitol Hill. Under MPP, which is grounded in 1996 statutory authority provided by Congress, aliens entering or seeking admission to the United States illegally or without proper documentation may be returned to Mexico and required to wait outside of the U.S. during their immigration proceedings. While in Mexico, the Mexican government has agreed to provide the aliens with appropriate humanitarian services for the duration of their stay. MPP helps promote a safer and more orderly process along the southwest border and discourages individuals from taking the dangerous trek to the U.S. and making non-meritorious or false asylum claims. MPP, along with other asylum reforms, ensure that the asylum process works as intended and enables expeditious immigration results. That means America's asylum system works better for those with genuine claims, not those seeking to exploit our generosity. Every economic migrant that abuses our asylum application process delays the granting of asylum to those with legitimate claims. Additionally, we have employed a robust regulatory reform agenda to safeguard the integrity of our asylum program from being exploited and abused. To name a few of the important changes, we've finalized regulations to reduce and remove incentives for aliens to file fraudulent, frivolous, and non-meritorious asylum claims for the sole purpose of obtaining work authorization. We filed regulations to ensure that we have sufficient time to vet asylum applicants filing initial work authorization applications and to address national security and fraud concerns. And we are also currently finalizing regulations to prevent criminal aliens from obtaining asylum to remain in the United States. In addition to bringing integrity to our immigration system, we must also ensure that we are doing everything in our power to advance the lives and opportunities of the great Americans who live within our borders. Borders serve a purpose. It is not just for the protection for its own sake. It is for the protection so that our citizens can thrive and prosper. As we continue to tackle this pandemic, the President has made it clear that he will not allow cheap labor to flood our borders and depress American wages. We will protect the interest of the American worker. President Trump's proclamation to protect American jobs directed the department to undertake a two-part approach to ensure employers put America's first in line to be hired as we continue this unprecedented economic recovery. The proclamation uses presidential authority to temporarily pause the issuance of certain non-immigrant work visas like H-1Bs until December 31st, 2020, while directing various departments to use all available tools to transition to a merit-based immigration system, ending often exploited avenues for fraud and abuse. New requirements include non-displacement provisions, which prohibit companies from laying off American workers only to replace them with foreign nationals, as well as new efforts to prevent illegal aliens from obtaining work permits. We are also collaborating with the Department of Labor to protect the wages and working conditions of U.S. workers by strengthening our ability to launch investigations of potential fraud and abuse in the H-1B visa program. In addition to upholding the rule of law at the border and throughout our immigration system, we are also enforcing the law directly and without apology. Since President Trump took office, we have seized more than 4 million pounds of hard drugs like fentanyl, cocaine, and methamphetamines. Those are drugs that will never enter and devastate American communities, and their seizures take billions of dollars from the pockets of the cartels. DHS law enforcement is also thwarting human smugglers and apprehending gang members from criminal organizations like MS-13 within our borders. Under President Trump's leadership, we've removed over 20,000 alien gang members from the United States, over 4,000 of which were affiliated with the vile MS-13 gang. The Trump administration's message is simple. If you're a human trafficker, a drug smuggler, or any criminal seeking to break our laws and illegally enter America, you will find no sanctuary in our country. The commitment of this administration to securing the border, restoring integrity to our immigration system, and enforcing the law have paid dividends for our homeland and for the American people. I want to thank the Heritage Foundation for everything that you do to uphold the institutions and values that make our country the greatest in the world. Your supporters understand that without borders, we no longer have a country. You understand that the president was right to question our immigration status quo and stand up for the interest of the American workers and the safety of our communities. And I'm proud of the work that DHS continues to do in fulfilling the president's mandate that he received nearly 4 years ago. As a department, we have not shied away from overcoming difficult challenges, and we never will. Thank you again.
Thank you, Secretary Wolf, very much for that incredible accomplishments. And we're so grateful for the work that you and the president are doing to build the wall, to fix our immigration system, and to keep our cities safe. Well, while we fight to keep our border secure, we must also fight to keep our elections secure. Fair elections indeed are a cornerstone of our republic. They mean that every citizen gets a voice in who's leading our country. So it's disheartening, actually, to look at the Heritage Election Fraud Database and see 1,300 cases of voter fraud across the country, each case with serious implications. Just recently, in the 2018 congressional election, my home state of North Carolina had a felony case of tampering with absentee ballots that resulted in holding an entirely new election. And yet the left continues to do everything in their power to make election fraud easier. So the Heritage Foundation team has been hard at work to preserve the security of our elections.
Well, that's right, Andrew. And our next speaker is our foremost expert on election integrity, Hans von Spakovsky. Hans is a Heritage Senior Fellow, and he's the manager of our Election Law Reform Initiative. And you've probably seen Hans all over the news lately talking about this very important issue. And we're excited to have him speaking to us today. And don't forget, if you want to ask a question, just submit your question in the box on the left side of your screen. We want to hear from you, and I'd love to be able to shoot one of your questions to Hans. But before he joins us, take a look at this next video unpacking the truth about mail-in voter fraud.
There's been a lot of talk recently about mail-in voting as a means to replace in-person voting. Many claim that it's just as safe as voting in person. But did you know that in past elections, hundreds of thousands of ballots sent back by voters have been rejected by election officials for defects? Millions more have been undelivered, misdelivered, or reported missing. According to the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, since 2012, 2 million ballots were returned as undeliverable, and more than 28 million ballots were unaccounted for. To say it another way, no one knows what happened to them. Unlike polling place ballots, the absentee ballot system introduces huge blind spots in the chain of custody. It can make voters subject to pressure, coercion, and intimidation in their homes by candidates, campaign staffers, party activists, and political guns for hire. It can also create opportunities for fraudulent ballot harvesting. Have you heard of ballot harvesting? It's when a third party collects and delivers absentee ballots on behalf of other voters. It's legal in more than half of U.S. states and the District of Columbia. But fraud can easily be committed by those collecting the ballots. Take North Carolina, for example. A Republican political operative illegally collected and tampered with voters' ballots in 2016 and 2018. This led to an election redo in North Carolina's 9th Congressional District in 2019. But fraud is not the only issue with a mail-in ballot system. As recent primary elections have demonstrated, the United States Postal Service is not prepared to handle the huge influx of mail-in ballots in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. Take New York's June primary. Due to COVID-19, there was a huge increase in mail-in voting. The result? Disaster. The Postal Service failed to postmark thousands of ballots being sent back by voters, leading to those ballots being disqualified and rejected. Many ballots were also delivered to voters too late, effectively making it impossible for eligible voters to return their ballots in time to be counted. Additionally, state election officials were not prepared for the massive number of mail-in ballots, delaying the results for weeks. Ultimately, 1 in 5 mail-in ballots in New York City were rejected. That means 84,000 ballots, or 21%, were not counted. New York's train wreck of a primary is not a standalone case. Recent primaries across the country that attempted or encouraged universal mail-in voting suffered similar lapses in the system that led to the disenfranchisement of thousands of voters. But these examples are just primaries, and they typically have a far lower participation rate than the general election. Of course, those who are most at risk or too sick or disabled to vote in person should be able to vote with absentee ballots. But the rest of us should be able to vote at our polling place in person, using the same health safety protocols we're using to go to the pharmacy or grocery stores. Voting is one of the most solemn, patriotic duties we have as citizens of this great country. We have the right to ensure our vote will be counted when we ourselves drop it in the ballot box, rather than depending on the Postal Service or some stranger to maybe, hopefully, deliver our ballot and not change who we voted for.
Good afternoon, Hans. Thank you for joining us. Let's
Well,
kick
thanks for
off
having me.
our segment now. We're delighted to have you here as always. Let's kick off our segment with a poll of our audience. Everyone should see a question in the box on the left-hand side of your screen. If you click the poll tab, then you can send us in your answer. So here's the question. What changes have you seen in the election policies in your home state? Number one, are the polls staying open as usual? Or is your state switching to universal mail-in ballots and sending ballots to all voters? Or maybe are they mailing absentee ballot request forms to all voters? Or maybe you don't know what your state's doing. Maybe your state doesn't know what it's doing yet. These are all questions that we would love to hear what's happening across the country, and we can do that by you taking the poll here. So please do that, and then we'll get into your questions after Hans speaks. So Hans, right now I'm going to hand it over to you because I know folks are really looking forward to your comments and thoughts on all this.
Well, Genevieve, I really appreciate that. Hopefully, the members of Heritage understand that Heritage is actually the leading voice in the country on election reform intended to address the vulnerabilities of our system. And unfortunately for us, there are many vulnerabilities. I mean, one of the ways we try to show that is by the creation of the election fraud database that Andrew mentioned earlier. It's unique. There's no other such database in the country. And it's just a sampling of the proven cases of fraud from across the country. It's been cited by President Trump, by Sean Hannity, by the Wall Street Journal, CNN, the Washington Post, and many others. And it's not just that it's there to educate the public and the media about the fact that fraud really happens in our elections. It's also being used by, for example, state attorney generals who are involved in litigation by organizations trying to, for example, get rid of their voter ID laws and other common sense reforms. And it's a way of showing that fraud really does exist. In addition to that, we've really been working on trying to warn not only the public, but state legislators and members of Congress about the dangers of going to all mail elections instead of having in-person voting the way we normally do. In fact, we put out the first paper on COVID-19 and how in-person voting can actually be safely done in this and has been done in other pandemics. We just recently put out standards on absentee balloting that goes through and shows what states should do and what they shouldn't do in this matter. And we've really been involved in not only briefing, for example, secretaries of state on this issue, but we've been going to and talking to state legislators, for example, briefing them at meetings of ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Conference, which, as you all probably know, is a national association of conservative state legislators from all over the country. All of this is very important because without fair elections, it's very difficult for us to get the folks elected into positions in the state legislatures and in Congress that we hope will push the solutions to our problems that we as conservatives think are the right solutions. And unfortunately, folks on the left, particularly the progressive left, Genevieve, are doing everything they can to make it easier to cheat and easier to manipulate election results. And we can see that this year. I have never seen as many lawsuits filed this year, more than ever before in any prior election year. Upwards of 160 lawsuits at last count, almost all filed by the left and almost all virtually the same, trying to avoid state voter ID laws, trying to avoid the the safety protocols that states have for absentee ballots, for example, trying to get rid of witness signature requirements. And by the way, trying to override state laws that ban vote harvesting to try to implement that all over the country. In other words, they want strangers to be able to come to your front door to pick up your ballot and potentially pressure you to vote a particular way or potentially be able to alter your ballots. All of this is very important, and I can tell folks we are working on this all the time. In just the last few months, we've done almost 300 media interviews trying to raise awareness of this issue and recommending solutions to try to solve the problem.
Well, Hans, your team is doing an incredible amount of work on this. And to expand on it, first of all, our poll is showing us that keeping the polls open as usual is about what 41% of those watching today say is happening in their state. But we'll see how that plays out across the country. Quick question for you here. This one coming in from Mark. He says, how can state election people ensure mail-in ballots get into the proper counting locations and get counted in a timely manner? And I think that's something people are very concerned about. Are we going to know at the end of November 3rd who the next president is, or is this going to get dragged out for days and weeks?
See, that's a real problem. The New York primary, it took them 6 weeks to count the absentee ballots, and because election officials simply were not prepared for the huge increase. And look, all I can tell folks is if because of COVID-19, you want to avoid going to a polling place, I would hope you weren't. But if you need to or have to, you need to vote as early as possible to ensure that your ballot actually gets delivered. And if possible, frankly, if you can hand deliver it to the county election office in the county government building, that's the best way of ensuring it gets there and is not lost by the U.S. Postal Service. If you wait until shortly before the election, there's simply no guarantee that the Postal Service will deliver it in time to be counted.
Okay, well, Hans, so we're not going to tell people to vote early and often, but we will tell them to vote early.
Yes, that's absolutely right.
Hans, thank you very much, and thank you for the great work that you and the election team are doing here. Appreciate it very much.
Well, I thank you.
If you want to actively ensure that the integrity of our elections in November, we hope that you'll consider signing up to be a poll worker. We need Americans who care about fair elections to go out and do their part. And if that's something that interests you, we'll put a link in the chat wall on the right side of your screen for you to learn more about how to get involved. You can also check out the event resource guide. Now, this push for mail-in ballots is just one of many efforts by the left to leverage the COVID-19 pandemic to push their dangerous policy agenda. And back in March, Heritage began to realize the far-reaching effects of COVID-19. So we formed the conservative movement's only comprehensive working group to formulate good policies for governments, businesses, and the nonprofit sector to respond. Pulling together 17 experts from each of those fields, the National Coronavirus Recovery Commission got to work. And Andrew, as you well know, this was a huge effort.
Yeah, Genevieve, it was a huge, massive, and really impressive effort. The commission published its final report in June of this year with 265 specific recommendations for how to save both lives and livelihoods. The report got great attention from Vice President Mike Pence, the White House Coronavirus Task Force, dozens of members of Congress. It's really, really an impressive outcome. Heritage, indeed, has been proud to contribute to the good policy solutions on this global pandemic. So before we look at the latest developments in the COVID landscape, let's take a look back at some of the awesome work of this National Coronavirus Recovery Commission.
The states are so totally different, and even within states, there are regions where you have hotspots and other parts of the state where you may not have very much infection at all. Our form of government actually works very well under these circumstances. As good conservatives, you know, we believe that the government that's closest to the people is the government that governs best.
The National Coronavirus Recovery Commission has been busy. Our 17 commissioners have released these recommendations, which really focus on very different aspects of American society. They are directed at governors, local leaders, the federal government, and the private sector on the steps that they can start taking to get America reopened again. And we're committed to doing so in a safe way, but also doing so expeditiously.
We don't want churches to be the centers of outbreaks. So we want churches to phase in a very cautious, practical, and pragmatic way. But we are likewise concerned regarding religious liberty intrusions by governors in different parts of the country. So we have to protect our civil liberties while simultaneously re-emerging as faith communities across America.
Honestly, I think that the president is correctly focused on reopening the economy. At the end of the day, good health policy is good economic policy.
We have to stay healthy and we have to get this economy going. And it's not a matter of either or. We have got to do both.
These people are experts in their industries, whether they're scientists or doctors or presidents of institutions or CEOs of large organizations. I'm happy to be there and represent small business.
Telehealth is here to stay. Virtual care is here to stay. Not for everything, but we know it's more affordable, more convenient, equal quality, or sometimes maybe better quality of care. That includes both for mental health, behavioral health, as well as physical health.
Part of the optimism that I feel as I think about the challenges that we're facing is America, World War II, they called us the arsenal of democracy because Americans bring innovation and forward momentum to any of these kinds of challenges. And I believe that's exactly what we're going to see here as well. But we have to keep our economy working in order to fuel that dynamism and to give the raw materials.
Well, before we get started with our panel on this topic, we've got a question for all of you in the audience. What has been your top COVID-related concern? Are you more worried about health risk or impacts to the economy? Perhaps it's education or personal freedom, or is it something else? We'd love to see what you have to say in the poll window on the left-hand side of your screen. We want to hear from you and see what you're concerned about, and that way we can bring that into the discussion with our speakers. All right, as you take the poll, let me introduce our panel. Dr. Kevin Pham is a medical doctor and visiting policy analyst here at the Heritage Foundation. We also have Paul Winfrey, who co-chaired the Coronavirus Commission and serves as director of Heritage's Rowe Institute for Economic Policy Studies. And rounding out the panel is Lindsay Burke, director of our Center for Education Policy, and she's been fighting for school reforms that can give families the flexibility they need during this very uncertain time. Don't forget, you can submit your questions for our panelists. After taking the poll, just hit the questions tab on the left-hand side of your screen, and we'll get to those right after opening comments from our panelists. And we're going to begin with Kevin. Kevin, great to have you with us. Let me ask you, what do we need to know about the latest health and medical developments related to the virus?
Thanks so much. We have learned a lot of things. What we needed to know at the very beginning was how to deal with this virus. When it came to our shores, it was the novel coronavirus. There was very little that we knew about this virus. And as a result, we had a lot of missteps with taking care of our country, taking care of America. But in the 6 or 7 months since then, we've learned a lot. And one of the lessons that we've learned repeatedly over and over and over again is that this virus can be extremely deadly to a certain part of the population. Nursing homes and long-term care facilities, they have been linked to about 40% of deaths in America, and 80% of deaths due to COVID in the United States have been among those who are 65 and older. We've also found that deaths are strongly associated, especially with the conditions that make up what's called metabolic syndrome, that is obesity, diabetes, and high blood pressure. These conditions especially, but also other conditions, will predispose someone to greater mortality due to COVID. So that being the case, it should be abundantly clear now who exactly needs to be protected the most from this virus. It is the elderly, those with comorbidities, and the people who work with those groups. That means that what we needed was targeted measures to protect public health, not sweeping broad-based lockdowns. And we should do everything we can to avoid falling back on such restrictive measures. And Heritage has been driving the conversation by trying to get out the right data and the right analytics to fight back against the fear narrative that's being pushed by the media. As you can see from the slide, a lot of our data is behind our call for responses driven by state and local leaders who are in control of enacting the policies, whereas the federal government is playing more of a supportive role. This is important because COVID-19 is a very localized disease. Based on the slide, you can see that a highly dense metropolis like the New York City area will be affected differently, which is why about 1% of counties can be responsible for 40% of COVID deaths. This is compared to just a few miles north and upstate, or much less a place like New Hampshire or Wyoming. Thank you for the slide. And we've made an impact as well. One of the excellent examples is that the Trump administration has been adopting Heritage's Ed Hausemeyer's proposed roadmap on vaccine production. They've been pre-ordering them to ensure that supply chains are ready to go when the vaccines are approved. He proposed this back in April, and then by July, we started seeing the administration begin contracting with manufacturers to procure the vaccines. And this approach uses the free market tools that we have to ensure that supply will be available instead of just going through mandates to force it to happen. And it's things like these that help us deal with COVID, not just as a virus that's going to deal with us, but as a health measure moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have been very thankful to have your medical expertise come alongside that of our policy experts, because one of the main goals here at Heritage has been to prevent the excessive expansion of the government's role in healthcare in response to the pandemic. And in fact, our healthcare policy experts have a new book coming out very soon. It's called No Choice, No Exit: The Left's Plan for Your Healthcare. All right, Paul, it is now over to you. One of the biggest issues on Americans' minds these days is getting back to work and get our economy started again. So what can you tell us about the prospects for economic recovery?
Thanks, Genevieve, and thanks for all the support of the members who are tuning in today. One of the best parts of our job, honestly, is getting to interact with all of you, and I sure am looking forward to interacting with and talking with all of you in person when the pandemic subsides, which hopefully is on the horizon. The good news is that, a couple months ago we were in Great Depression territory. Now we're in just a really bad recession territory. Ultimately, that's because a lot of the fundamentals of the economy before COVID took off were strong. That said, they weren't all strong. In particular, regulation. So the Trump administration has done a really good job over the last 4 years at rolling back some of the big ticket regulatory items that Obama put in place during his 8 years. But ultimately, We haven't gotten back even to the very beginning of the Obama administration, or where Obama basically took off. And so what that means is that the economy writ large is weighed down by regulatory burdens that ultimately we need another 4 to 8 to 16 years really to take on. One of the other things to just keep in mind here is that should there be an Obama administration, because a lot of those regulatory paths have already been blazed, it won't take them very long at all to come in and pretty much pick up right where they left off at the very beginning of 2017. So that's just something to keep on your radars. Another thing that we've been very involved with combating over the last few months is this I'm sure will be no surprise to all of you, but Congress loves to spend money, and they love to look for reasons to spend money, and they've been looking to COVID for reasons to spend money over the last 7 months. And so one of the things that we've been trying to combat, and I think we've ultimately been very successful at doing so, is the need for another major stimulus package. Again, Congress is always in a bad place on this, but we've gotten the White House to, I think, a very good place on this, and ultimately many of our allies in the Senate are right there and understand the non-need to engage in another stimulus package. And, 2 more things just to put on folks' radars before I turn it back over here to Genevieve. The first is that one of the things that COVID has ultimately left us in kind of a bad place on is state finances, and this issue of state bailouts and the federal government covering bad moves that states have made for a long period of time and using COVID as basically shelter to do that is not something that's going to go away. We will be confronting this for months, if not years to come. The second thing is that COVID has really accelerated trust fund exhaustion for the large entitlement programs, in particular Medicare, Social Security Disability Trust Fund, and also the Highway Trust Fund. Whoever the next president is will have to confront these issues, and ultimately it will require a unified policy and political front to keep us from experiencing major tax increases, especially tax increases on wages. So that's something that Heritage has led on for many years, and we're looking to continue leading on that and ultimately confronting it in a real way over the next 4 to 8 years. Thanks so much again for the opportunity to talk to you today, and looking forward to reaching out and speaking to many of you in person very soon.
Paul, don't go anywhere because we may have a question before this is all over. Stand by. Thank you. Lindsay, let's turn to how COVID has impacted education. It's an issue impacting many families with back to school season here upon us. Let's talk about how this is playing out now with this pandemic.
Great. Well, thank you, Genevieve, and welcome everyone. I'm thrilled to be with you today. Honestly, there are few areas, few sectors that have been more disrupted by the coronavirus than education has been. When schools across the country shut down in March in response to the pandemic, nearly 55 million students all of a sudden became accidental homeschoolers. And school districts were really caught flat-footed. Most districts, quite frankly, failed at crisis online learning. Only 1 in 3 school districts even expected teachers to provide instruction or monitor student academic progress. And currently, if we look across the country, half of K-12 schools are only offering online instruction. And so that, of course, affects millions of children across the country. As Education Secretary Betsy DeVos recently said, parents should have the option to send their children back to school for in-person instruction, but schools need to be open in order for them to have that choice. And she was absolutely right. And parents aren't waiting around. A Gallup survey recently found that public school enrollment will drop from 83% to 76%. And that would mean about 3.5 million children leaving the public school systems across the United States. So I cannot emphasize what a significant transformation this is that we're all witnessing in real time. And I would add that parents aren't just opting out of public schools, they are opting out of the old model of education. Parents across the country have banded together. They are forming pandemic pods to take their children's education into their own hands. Pandemic pods are small groups of parents who are pooling resources. They're hiring private tutors. They're hiring private teachers to teach their children together. And the rise of these pods over the past 2 months in response to these public school shutdowns has been a real-time, large-scale demonstration of community responsiveness in a crisis. Pandemic pods are the education version of the little platoons that were first mentioned by Edmund Burke. They prove that spirit of association that Alexis de Tocqueville identified as a defining characteristic of America, that spirit of association is alive and well. And we know that about half of parents have reported that they are at least looking into forming a pandemic pod. The failure of the district public school model and the rise of options like pods show why there has never been a more important time for school choice. Imagine if parents were able to control the nearly $800 billion that we spend each and every year on K-12 education. And at Heritage, we have long fought to make that a reality, helping to spearhead and implement options like education savings accounts that would allow parents to pay for private school tuition and online learning and private tutors. So now I'd like to introduce you to a mother who is doing just that. Jenny Clark has created her own pandemic pod, and along with other families, many of whom are paying for the pod with their education savings account. Here's her story.
This is our third year doing a learning pod, and we absolutely love it. We meet for 12 weeks in the fall and 12 weeks in the spring on Mondays for about 4 hours. We currently cover 3 subjects. So we do science, art, and English grammar. And we're even starting classes for those little kids that have grown up with us over the past couple of years. We love learning pods because they give our family the freedom and the flexibility to educate our kids according to our values and in ways that meet their unique needs. Learning pods are an amazing solution for families, and we hope that more families will continue this option, whether it's parent directed like our learning pod is, or even teacher directed over a variety of different ages. So we love our learning pod. We know that it's a neat opportunity, and we hope to help more families as well.
That's a great story. Well, we have a number of questions, but I'm going to throw out one question, guys, to all 3 of you, and you've got each 25 seconds to answer it. It's from Wade in North Carolina, and he says, how should we handle the next virus? So thinking about your respective areas, Kevin, I'll begin with you. How should we be thinking about that?
Sure. We've learned a lot of things about this virus, and the main thing we've learned is that all that we know about infectious disease is still true. So if we're talking about a respiratory disease, if there's a new virus that comes along, a new pandemic, then we need to implement these things that help prevent transmission. This goes back to washing hands. It sounds really basic, but that's how most respiratory viruses spread. And then we should also be open to measures such as masking. That masking puts a physical barrier in front of your respiratory orifices, so it will help prevent the spread of respiratory diseases. And we need to be open to these kind of things. And also, we also need to resist the idea that we need to lock down everything again, because that may have helped at the first 2 weeks, but when it extended out 3-4 weeks, several months, then it became too restrictive. So we need to be mindful of these things.
Yeah, to that point, Paul, just quickly, what have we learned from the economic side?
Yeah, you stole my thunder, Kevin. Look, I've been saying all along that good public health policy is good economic policy, and that is still true today as it was back in March. But the reality is, one of the big things that we've learned is that widespread shutdowns of big parts of the economy are just not good economic policy, and they're not good health policy. Ultimately, they're not particularly effective, but they're extremely economic costly. So we can't do that again. We can't do that again with this pandemic, and we're not going to be able to do that again with another pandemic without major consequences.
Lindsay, take us home.
2 words, school choice. And it really does come down to that at the end of the day. So many of the reasons why schools were caught flat-footed was because funding goes directly to physical school buildings. We have to rethink that model. The coronavirus has demonstrated that in real time. We need to send every education dollar we spend directly to families through universal education savings accounts.
Kevin, Paul, Lindsay, thank all of you. And thanks to all those who actually spent a lot of time and hours on the National Coronavirus Recovery Commission. Thank you for your work. And hopefully we're going to see a recovery in each of these areas very soon. And no doubt this is a great opportunity for conservative policy solutions to shine. And to all of our Heritage members here today, we want to know what other innovative policy ideas you may be learning about. How are you seeing innovations from your community improve healthcare, the economy, and even schools in your local area? Feel free to drop those answers in the chat wall on the right-hand side of your screen for further discussion. And as you do so, our Heritage team is going to post some additional resources for you. Here's a few. How to start an education pod, what Lindsay just talked about. Another links to our COVID-19 county-level data trackers. And if you haven't seen this yet, it's a terrific resource where you can see week to week what's happening in your county. And these are also available in your events resource guide, and we hope you will find both of them helpful.
Yeah, those are awesome, Genevieve. Thank you for sharing those. I love the back and forth that we're getting with our Heritage members. Thank you for answering the polls and offering up your ideas. So let's turn now and pivot to foreign policy, a subject area that you all care deeply about. Obviously, the coronavirus pandemic first spiraled out of control due to a lack of total transparency and lack of accountability from China. And in recent months, we've seen a ton of other problematic behaviors from the Chinese Communist Party, including gross human rights abuses and technological aggression on a global scale. So to break those issues down for us, we've put together a panel of Heritage's best experts on China. You all are going to love everyone joining me now on screen. So welcome to you all, to Dean, Olivia, Klon, to our virtual member summit. We're so thrilled that all of you are here live with us joining. Dean Chang is a senior research fellow in our Asian Studies Center, where he studies the Chinese political and security affairs. Olivia Enos, thank you, Olivia, for joining, a senior policy analyst also in our Asian Studies Center, where she focuses on human rights and democracy. And last, Klon Kitchen, the director of our new Center for Technology Policy, where he leads all of Heritage's technology policy efforts. Welcome, everybody. So glad you're joining us this afternoon. And a friendly reminder to members who are with us to submit your questions for our panelists right now using that box on the left-hand side of your screen. All right, Dean, let's start with you. You have studied the Chinese Communist Party for years. So what is it that we need to know about their ideology and about how that drives with their engagement with the rest of the world?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. So let's begin with how China looks at the world. There are four key strands that highlight how differently China looks at the world. The first is that China is in Asia. Now, that might seem kind of obvious, but one of the key things to keep in mind is that when we look at European history, there's always been balance of power, whether it was the rise of a Napoleon, or the rise of a Hitler, or the rise of the Soviet Union. Other major European powers coalesced to counter them. In Asia, over the course of 5,000 years of history, you rarely, if ever, saw any kind of balancing behavior. China has always dominated the continent, and that's why it's known as not simply the Middle Kingdom, but perhaps the Central Kingdom. Those are the same characters in Chinese. A second piece is the century of humiliation. For the last 100 or so years, 1839 to 1949, China went from being top dog to being at the bottom, nearly being colonized, especially by foreign powers, whether European or Japan. A third is the absence of rule of law. 5,000 years of civilization, China never developed an independent judiciary. Judges and things were appointed by the emperor. And under the Chinese Communist Party, the rule of law continues to be more a suggestion than certainly the reality. And finally, the lack of civil society. There is nothing outside the reach of the Chinese Communist Party. No religion, no non-governmental organization, no corporation, anything larger than 2 or 3 people is supposed to have a party committee. all of that shapes very much how China looks at the world, and it therefore shapes how they are approaching their key goals, which is to keep the Chinese Communist Party in power. It is to preserve what the Chinese consider to be their territorial integrity, which includes their claim on Taiwan, their claims over Tibet and Xinjiang, their claims over the South China Sea, and preserving the conditions of economic development, which means, above all these days, making sure that China is part of the global supply chain, can dictate the terms for industrial standards, can all of these come together in terms of influencing worldwide norms, such as whether or not the WHO should pay attention to Taiwanese warnings about this strange new disease that was emerging back in November and December. At the end of the day, it's important to recognize China is not out to conquer the world, but it very much wants to influence the world. And it uses all of the mechanisms available to it, economic, political, diplomatic, because they're all part of an integrated whole to push China's objectives to the fore. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dean. That was an impressive rundown in 3 minutes of how China views itself through those 4 different lenses. That's really awesome. So let's turn now to Olivia. How does this ideology that Dean's just laid out, these 4 different areas, shape how the Chinese Communist Party controls their own people?
Thank you, Andrew. Some of the world's worst human rights violations are unfolding before our very eyes in Xinjiang, China. There, between 1.8 and 3 million Uyghurs are held in over 260 political re-education camps that the Chinese Communist Party has engineered. As Dean mentioned, the CCP targets Uyghurs in Xinjiang because it sees those individuals as a threat to its core priorities, which includes safeguarding its sovereignty as well as ensuring internal stability. Subsequently, the Uyghurs that are inside these political camps face forced indoctrination, torture, and in some cases, even death. New reports are really shedding an even more pernicious edge on the plight of the Uyghur people, demonstrating that the Chinese Communist Party is seeking to significantly reduce, if not entirely eliminate, the next generation of Uyghurs. And it's doing so through its draconian family planning policies. One report noted that the Chinese Communist Party has a goal of forcibly sterilizing between 80 and 90% of all Uyghur women of childbearing age. And for children who are had outside of the Chinese Communist Party's mandated 3 to 4 year birth spacing timeline, many of these preborn children are being subject to forced abortion, and even after they are born, to infanticide. Even after Uyghur children are born, many of them are being separated from their families, either because mothers and fathers are being sent to political re-education camps, or because the children are being removed from their families and placed in so-called orphanages, kindergartens, or even preschools. But these are hardly preschools. In fact, the children themselves are placed in facilities where we see that they have fortified walls surrounding them, barbed wire fences keeping them in, and 24-hour surveillance watching their every move. This evidence seems to suggest that the Chinese Communist Party has the intent to eliminate or significantly reduce the Uyghur population, which means that the Uyghurs today may be facing genocide and crimes against humanity. In a forthcoming heritage report, I recommend that the Trump administration call a spade and say whether genocide and crimes against humanity are taking place. In a previous heritage report, I recommended that Chen Guangguo, the Xinjiang party secretary responsible for architecting the surveillance state and the police state that have allowed over millions of Uyghurs to be interned, be sanctioned, and the Trump administration did so. If we hope to communicate to the Uyghur people that Americans and the US government cares about the Uyghur people, then we should call a spade and call it genocide and crimes against humanity. Because even if the Chinese Communist Party does not care for the Uyghur people's rights, the American people do. Thank you.
Man, thank you, Olivia, for speaking about those issues with such great clarity and conviction. They're certainly sobering. Klon, I'm probably not turning to you for any better news, but let's go to you for this next question anyway. Help us understand how technology fits with what Dean and Olivia have shared. How does the Chinese Communist Party view technological innovation? Share with us a little bit.
Thanks, Andrew, and thank you to everyone who's joining us this afternoon. China is currently trying to prove the concept of a government that can leverage the wealth of a state-run capitalism with the stability and security of authoritarianism. And technology is at the heart of this concept of governance. Internally, they believe a strong technology sector is essential for building national wealth, for securing the government, and for managing the multitude of variables that influence the nation's social, economic, and political outcomes. Externally, China has also rightly concluded that leading in at least 10 key technological sectors will be essential for building and for leveraging international influence and power, including the development of a military which is capable of deterring and defeating the United States. Now, in an effort to leapfrog the traditional expenses and long time delays of innovation and research, for decades now, Beijing has systematically stolen intellectual property, constrained foreign participation in their marketplaces, and generally practiced coercive economic policies that greatly distort the global free market. Put simply, the United States and China are in a competition between models of governance. An American model that prioritizes human thriving, freedom, and individual worth, and a Chinese model that prioritizes regime stability, security, and collective strength. And both of these models rightly understand high technology as a prerequisite for realizing these visions. This is why the Heritage Foundation has been instrumental in engaging with the administration and government and the legislature as well, and thinking about how we can effectively rise to the national security constraints that China seeks to impose, while also protecting our domestic and economic security interests as well. A key example of this has been a tireless effort over the last 12 months of engaging with the British government to help them realize the foolishness of their old policy of allowing the Chinese telecommunications company Huawei to build their 5G network. We worked with the administration, we worked with the Boris Johnson administration in the United Kingdom, and we engaged with them on multiple occasions to help them understand the nature of the threat and how a new policy, one that denies Huawei access to their domestic networks, would be advantageous to their citizens and to our partnership. And thankfully, they have changed courses. That's just one example of the engagement that we've done and the impact we've had. And it's because of the support that people such as yourselves provide for us. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Klon, very much. All right. Well, we've got a lot of good questions coming in from our members. This first one, Dean, I think goes to you, and it's about holding China accountable. It's from John. John, thanks for submitting this. He asks, China has premeditatedly caused crimes against humanity through causing the worldwide Wuhan virus pandemic. How can damages be assessed against China? What should we do to hold China accountable? Dean?
Well, the idea of suing a government is pretty much off the table, simply because that's just not how international relations is done. But that doesn't mean that we can't do a variety of other things. Certainly, the effort to make sure that the WHO listens to places like Taiwan, U.S. and Western efforts to get Taiwan access to the WHO, making clear that the coronavirus is from China and not letting China off the hook. Our European counterparts have actually also been pointing to the fact that China's personal protective equipment aid, quote unquote, was often not working. So I think that these are things, keeping the spotlight on China's failures is an essential part of holding them accountable.
Yeah, absolutely. Visibility into that makes a lot of sense. All right, final question, Olivia, to you on this. You just shared some incredible things that sadly are not well known enough in today's political climates, right? The American people need to know more about these abuses from the Chinese Communist Party. What are things that our members can do to put a spotlight on what's going on there?
Well, I think it's important to be educated about what is going on in China and not just about what's facing the Uyghurs there, but also the myriad of human rights abuses that the Chinese Communist Party carries out. People of all faiths are not able to practice their faith the way that they see fit. It's forced to be essentially carried out in such a way that it furthers the Chinese Communist Party's agenda. So being educated about what's going on is very important. I think also raising concerns, within your communities is an equally important way. Even reaching out to folks here in Washington and expressing that Americans care about promoting freedom, not just in our backyard, but also abroad. And that extends all the way to China.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. All right, Kalan, I can't resist and let you off the hook. So let me ask you one question too. Huawei in China and the race to 5G. What's the current state of play there, and what are things that the U.S. government should do to make sure that we're staying ahead technologically?
So over the last 12 months, the Chinese telecommunications company Huawei has taken a severe hit. They were prevented from building out the US 5G network. They are systematically being denied access to European partners as well as other partners around the globe. The US government under this administration has also enacted a series of sanctions that are denying them access to high technology, including some of the most advanced microchips that would enable them to continue to innovate and build out their network. So they're actually reeling, and we're having a significant impact. We still need to work with partners and allies in terms of building up an alternative, a Western trusted alternative to Huawei. But I have to say, in the last 12 months, we have made a categorical impact on Huawei as a company and more broadly on China's ability to leverage private sector companies as an extension of their state.
All right, well, maybe there is a little bit of good news there, Claude. Thank you for that. Dean, I can't pass up an opportunity to ask you one follow-up question here, too, about Taiwan. That's an issue in a country that our members care a lot about, and the landscape of Taiwan has changed. This administration has done a lot to impact that. Can you give us your thoughts on that and what the maybe next, the next Trump administration could do with Taiwan?
So the United States is, of course, the key patron for Taiwan. We are the, frankly, only arms supplier to Taiwan. The Heritage Foundation has long proudly supported the government on Taiwan and tried to make sure that Taiwan has the ability to defend itself. We just completed, I believe, an $8 billion sale of the latest generation of F-16s for Taiwan. Hopefully in the next administration, no matter who it is, but especially if it's Mr. Trump, we will see a Taiwan-U.S. free trade agreement because U.S. relations with Taiwan is not just security, it is economic, and that is an essential part of building out and sustaining the strong ties between ourselves and Taipei.
All right, so let's continue our journey from Taiwan then to North Korea. Olivia, you have been at the forefront of a lot of the ways the Trump administration and the deal maker in chief has tried to work deals with North Korea. In fact, you were there at one of the summits, did a ton of press for Heritage. What do you think if Trump gets elected again in November? What do the next 4 years look like with North Korea? And then conversely, if Biden gets elected in November, how does that change the game?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Andrew. As you mentioned, I did have the privilege of being on the ground in both Singapore and Hanoi during the summits. And, a huge part of my message there was to raise not only the security concerns that we have with North Korea, its missile and nuclear program, but also is heavily focused on raising human rights concerns. And I think in the very early days of the Trump administration, we saw them shining a real spotlight on those human rights issues, as well as a commitment to maintaining maximum pressure when it comes to those sanctions to really push North Korea to give up its nuclear and missile programs and also to discontinue its horrific practices of human rights violations. Regardless of whether it's a Trump administration or a Biden administration, I would love to see both return to that maximum pressure policy, one that recognizes the strategic elements of incorporating human rights issues into any broader strategy or response.
Well, we are just overwhelmed by the questions that we're getting from Heritage members on this forum. So, Dean, I'm going to put it back to you again. This question comes from Brandon. Thanks for submitting it, Brandon. And he asks, at what red line should the U.S. respond to Chinese aggression? If China indeed wishes to invade the island, should the U.S. be involved militarily?
Well, I think a central part of America's position throughout the Western Pacific has been our network of alliances with countries like South Korea and Japan, but in the case of Taiwan, more the Taiwan Relations Act, which has basically made very clear that the U.S. Will not simply stand by if the Chinese act militarily against Taiwan. I think that this is something that is an essential part of deterrence. But we do need to recognize that Taiwan is an autonomous player. What we don't want, and have never wanted, is for Taiwan to sort of go off on the assumption that the U.S. would automatically support them no matter what, just as we have never supported that for South Korea or Japan. So we do have to walk a fine line. I think that Heritage has consistently made clear we support a peaceful resolution to the cross-strait situation, but that where we are right now is probably a fairly comfortable one. Beijing, I think, does understand. It faces the very high prospect of American intervention if they should simply wake up tomorrow morning and say, I think it's time to invade Taiwan.
Well, you heard it here first, folks. Klon, Apple computers have made a lot of news in the last couple of days with their stock price fluctuating, and then today with some new products being unveiled. Another question from a Heritage member here. What is to stop Apple from engaging in nefarious deals with China? What are things we should do?
Well, so I will say that in the wake of the COVID-19 crisis, a number of technology companies who have made very large bets in China have been forced to reevaluate those bets. So while many of us long before COVID-19 were warning about significant supply chain routes through China and the security concerns that posed, China's reckless threat to deny access to PPE equipment, to slow down supply chains, to deny vaccines and other kind of prerequisite chemicals for medicinal purposes, that caused a lot of U.S. companies to think again. Certainly that would include Apple. There's also a growing national security conversation that is now migrating into the private sector, where companies realize that great power competition between the United States and China is reemerging, and that competition is going to require companies to choose a side. This is something that James Carafano, our VP of Foreign Policy, and I wrote an extended essay on, and we specifically published that in a technology trade magazine because we wanted to engage and influence technology leaders. We wanted them to understand that there is, in fact, a reemerging great power competition, and that they will not be able to avoid that, particularly because of the way China chooses to fuse its national security and government apparatus with private companies. And we therefore have to respond to that.
Great. Thank you for that. All right. Last question here. Back to Olivia. Olivia, conservatives often get accused of talking well about facts and using our brains, but too often forgetting the heart, to not telling stories. You have an incredible opportunity to share stories of people who are having their human rights abused. Can you share, not to put you on the spot, but share a story with us that maybe we can use in conversation that just demonstrates the importance of the issues that you get to deal with day in and day out?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I'm so glad that you raised that, Andrew. I've had the pleasure of getting to know a young woman named Ziba Marat. She is a Uyghur American who actually lives in the DC area, and she has not spoken to her mother, who is back in Xinjiang, China, for over 2 years now. September 11th actually marked the 2-year date since she and her baby daughter had talked with her mother over WeChat. Her mother was an upstanding citizen, a doctor, well educated, and she is spending out her days, presumably, inside a political re education camp in China. And Ziva's main question has been, what does a daughter have to do in order to be able to hug her mother, to speak to her mother? And she's not able to do that right now because the Chinese Communist Party has decided that it is more important to infringe on the fundamental rights of an individual than it is to preserve them. And so I think it's stories like Ziva's and like her mother, Gulshan Abbas, that we need to hear more about, because these are real individuals whose lives are affected by governments who couldn't care less about preserving and protecting their freedoms. So I hope that we're able to really, provide both a platform and also shed a spotlight on these issues that so infrequently receive the attention that they deserve by giving them a name and a face like Ziva's and like her mother, Gulshan's.
Well, thank you for doing that. And it's organizations like Heritage, thanks to our member support, that we're able to provide a platform to share those types of stories. And Dean, Klon, Olivia, thank you for staying on here for so long. We're super, super grateful for your insights. Thank you for letting me ask some questions. And thanks to all of our Heritage members for asking questions there as well. Hope you all have a great rest of the afternoon. All right, folks. Well, now we are going to turn to a poll for our Heritage members, another poll this afternoon. And so after hearing from our policy experts today, we'd like you to identify which threat from China do you think poses the greatest risk to American interests? All right, so here are the three options to select. 1, the Communist Party's lack of accountability and their rule of law. 2, their abuse of human rights. And goodness, one of those stories that Olivia shared, something else. And then, or 3, their manipulation through technology, or something else. You could tell us that's something else in the poll that you see in the box on your screen to the left side there. We're grateful for your feedback.
Well, Andrew, that was a great interview with all three of those folks, and we have covered so much ground already today, from how to end violent riots and restore our American civic culture, to how to preserve election integrity while we save lives and livelihoods, and all at the same time, how to push back against threats from communist China.
Yeah, we've been all over the place. A lot of great content that we've been able to cover, all important topics. And Genevieve, it's always awesome getting to do this with you. All these different issues are essential in our ongoing fight for America. And that fight is informing everything that we are doing at Heritage, especially in these next couple of months. So before we wrap up our program, I'm excited to welcome Heritage's Vice President of Government Relations, Tommy Binion, to join us to share how we are advancing conservative principles on each of these issues that we've discussed today for the rest of 2020 and beyond. Tommy, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
It's great to see you too, Andrew. I'm coming to you live from the Heritage Staff Lounge. I have realized over the course of the pandemic that this is my favorite spot in the world to have a cup of coffee. But today I don't need coffee because I get to be with you all, brave and patriotic Americans who know what makes this nation exceptional. And that's why you support the Heritage Foundation. As it ever is when I get the opportunity to join you in person, it's my privilege today to tell you thank you for your support. And I mean this when I say it. It means more. Your support means more this year, today, than it's ever meant before. No, these are not normal times in the United States of America, and they're not normal times at the Heritage Foundation. As you've heard today, we are in a fight for America, and we consider this the fight of our lives. We are working differently and harder than we ever have because the stakes are higher than they've ever been before, and the contrast between the left's vision for remaking the United States of America and the conservative vision for preserving what makes America exceptional is as high. What makes America exceptional is as high as it's ever been before. Now, for this fight for America, we have innovated our tools, we've sharpened our arrows, and we've strengthened our armor. We are looking at a nation that is facing a triple threat: the COVID pandemic, the economic fallout that has followed, and the civil unrest and destruction that has hit the streets of the cities of our country. That is the context under which we will go to an election in 49 days. And it's that election that will set the stage for a year of the most consequential policy making in our lifetime. Well, that's where we're focused at the Heritage Foundation. That's where our eyes are fixed, is on that year of consequential policy making. And we have some great tools to be able to influence that policy. The first one I'm excited to tell you about today is the Solutions product. Now, Solutions is a briefing book that we started building for candidates that are running for office. It covers just about every issue they're going to face in the United States Congress, and it gives them a background briefing. It gives them facts and figures. It gives them poll-tested talking points. But we've made it a little bit different this year. We've put it all online. It's at heritage.org/solutions. We've made it super fast to download, but we've made it very, very accessible. Yes, it's built for candidates, and it will help them be successful and effective in the United States Congress. But it's available to you. It's available to journalists. It's available to newscasters. It's available to students. It's available to anybody that cares about these federal policy issues. When you download it at heritage.org/solutions, you can go in and see just what I'm talking about. When I walk a candidate for Congress through this product, their eyes light up because they can tell I've made their lives easier. And when we are able to make their lives easier, we're able to make them more effective in terms of Congress. But what I'm more excited about is the Mandate for Leadership 2020 edition. This is a Heritage flagship product that you've heard about before. But because this is a unique year and because we've got an ever-changing political culture, we've innovated. And we've put this product out a year early so that it has a chance to enter the bloodstream of the debate and dialogue going to be the backdrop for this election. This video will tell you all about it.
The Heritage Foundation is thrilled to release the 2020 Mandate for Leadership. This comprehensive report is the gold standard for conservative policy recommendations for the start of a new presidential term. First published in January of 1981, the Mandate for Leadership served as a conservative plan of action for the Reagan administration. President Reagan placed the document on the seats of his cabinet members at their first meeting. By the end of his first year, his administration had implemented nearly half of these ideas. 37 years later, President Trump and his administration embraced nearly 2/3 of policy recommendations from the 2016 Mandate for Leadership. The Mandate for Leadership is a result of a rigorous policy development process by the nation's top experts in their respective fields. The recommendations chart a path for the administration to enact policies based on the principles of free enterprise, limited government, individual freedom, traditional American values, and a strong national defense. This book is tailored and actionable. Instead of making recommendations in broad terms, we make them in the most specific terms. In the index, you will find an accounting of every single policy recommendation, as well as who in the government has the authority to act on it. This year's edition is focused on the real-life impact of government policy on American citizens. We have woven in stories from real Americans. We hope that this reinforces the understanding of the impact that federal government policy has on everyday life. We also hope that it serves as a reminder that such policy should always be designed for their benefit. When policymakers work to implement these solutions, they should know that the Heritage Foundation has their back. We will demonstrate these policies' benefits to millions of Americans, both through traditional media, social media, and public events, and by working with other think tanks and advocacy organizations. The next presidential administration will make thousands of decisions and pursue hundreds of policies. What is most important about each of those actions is how their outcomes affect individual Americans throughout the land. It's not the political fallout or how it plays in the news. What matters most about each and every action is how it contributes to the flourishing of individual Americans. We know that the 2020 Mandate for Leadership can help guide the way.
The thing that makes me most proud to work at the Heritage Foundation is that we don't just write papers and books and then stick them in a drawer. It's actually my job and my team's job to make sure that those papers and those books have an impact. We work close to Capitol Hill so that we can be there every day, making sure that our policy analysis is in the hands of the policymakers that can do something about it. Well, over the summer, it was my job to take that very product, the mandate for leadership, to the White House and deliver it to President Trump's Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows. Here's that clip.
Sir, I have a present for you, and,
and
a gift for the
Great.
president as
All
well.
right.
These are hot off the press because we're optimistic about the future, and we're optimistic that you're going to be working on an agenda that is beyond COVID. We've put down our thoughts on what a conservative agenda would look like during the next term of a presidency. One copy is for you, and one copy is for the president. The first two copies of the 2020 mandate.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Tommy. Thank you, and thank Ms. James and all the folks at Heritage, not only for the wonderful gift. I will hand deliver it to the President of the United States, but perhaps the 2020 mandate can be a blueprint for what happens in a second Donald J. Trump term.
Thank you,
Thanks,
sir.
Tommy.
Well, it sure was a pleasure to hear the president's staff call the mandate for leadership a potential agenda for President Trump's second term. That is what we work for. We work to make these products the agenda of members of Congress, administration officials, whoever they may be. We work to make sure it's their agenda. This year, it's the same as it ever was, but it's very, very different. We're innovating, but we're fighting very, very hard. The stakes are higher than they have ever been, and your support means more than it's ever been. Thank you very much.
Hey, Tommy, thank you, and thank you to the work of your whole team for ensuring that Heritage's conservative policy principles are right at the fingertips of our nation's lawmakers and leaders. You are absolutely right. This is truly a pivotal moment in our country's history. But all of you watching should know, Heritage is strategically positioned to meet this moment and to shape the trajectory of our nation's future.
Genevieve, you and I both know that the members of the Heritage Foundation have played the critical role in making that happen. They are the difference makers. So to everyone who is tuning in right now, we want to just pause to sincerely say thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You have made possible all the great work of the policy experts that you've heard from today and all the resources that we've shared with you, like this copy of the 2020 mandate, all the impact that we're having around the nation. Those accomplishments belong to you. So thank you. You know, this future is uncertain. We all know that. But you also know that Heritage is here for the long haul, fighting to preserve for America's exceptionalism. No matter what happens in the coming weeks, in the coming months, Heritage will be on the front lines as your voice in Washington, fighting for the principles that you hold dear.
Indeed, and thanks to all of you who have been with us throughout the program today. We've enjoyed hearing from you throughout the program, through the polls, the chats, and the questions. Thanks so much for participating with us as we considered these pressing issues. We hope everyone leaves today feeling encouraged and emboldened to go out and stand for the conservative solutions that we all believe in. And as you do so, we hope you'll take advantage of the Heritage resources like our event resource guide for more information on the topics we covered. And that includes a page at the very end where you can commit to taking 5 actions in the fight for America, one of which we hope is signing up for the Citizens Guide.
People should go online right now, right after this, and sign up for that, because the Citizens Guide is a perfect way for everyone to stay engaged, especially in your local communities. And we all know that old saying, all politics is local. Well, because of you, ladies and gentlemen, there is an army of fellow patriots who are upholding the cherished American principles and who are all united in this fight for America. Gosh, it's a beautiful thing.
And we look forward to being with all of you, hopefully very soon in person. But as we wrap up today's program, we want to leave you with some special messages from conservative leaders, from some of our colleagues here at Heritage, and from Heritage members around the country on why and how they are fighting for America. And as we head into the days, weeks, and the months, just a couple ahead, we hope you feel encouraged by these stories.
Thank you, Genevieve. Thank you again to all of our wonderful, wonderful Heritage members for joining us today. Hi, Mom and Dad, who I know are watching as well. So on behalf of the Heritage Foundation, may God bless you. And may God bless America.
I'm fighting for America because
Our founding father put in place a system that works for all of us. Today, there are people who are trying to tear down that system, that way of life.
My grandparents fled to the safety of America. Starting as a peddler, one grandfather built a small business, Wallman's Dry Goods Store. I fight to preserve this American dream for generations to come.
I fight for America with Mizzou College Republicans to encourage more conservative students in Missouri to fight for our country and not be silent during debates.
I'm fighting for America because it's the best country in the history of the world. Always has been, is now, always will be.
I fight for America because of the religious freedom we enjoy here. Freedom is similar to good health. Quite often we take it for granted. And if we were to lose it, we would suffer for a lifetime. Join me in the fight. Let's not take our freedom for granted.
Why we fight? I fight for my dad. World War II, Korean War veteran, lifetime law enforcement. He taught me the honor and rewards of a life of selfless service, and I never forgot that.
In the U.S. Senate, I'm fighting for every single American to have the freedoms that were hard fought by those that came before us, that enable us to uniquely be one nation under God.
Why do I fight for America? For my son, for my other son and my daughter, and all the sons and daughters of America, so that they know that this is the land of hope and opportunity.
I'm fighting for America because I believe that all families deserve the opportunity to have education choice.
I fight for America because America is worth fighting for, protecting our American values and institutions so that my children have the chance to grow up in this great country in the way that I did.
I fight for America because it allows people like my family who experience communism and loss firsthand to understand what freedom means and to flourish in civil society.
America has always been a safe country, and we have to preserve our principles and values for future generations.
I fight for America because we are still Ronald Reagan's shining city on a hill.
I'm fighting for America by taking on China. We have to shine a light on this country, call them for their bad behavior, and encourage them to join the world stage as a responsible actor.
I fight for America because it's the land of opportunity where people can pursue their dreams and reach them. I fight for America because I'm free to go to work every morning, provide for my family, and help provide for those who are less fortunate.
Because America is worth fighting for, and we must do everything we can to preserve this great nation.
I became a reserve deputy because it fuels my passion to do good for my community. It is another facet of my life where I can give back to those who have given to me. And as a woman, I can stand here and proudly say that my children, my daughters look up to me.
I fight for America because our founding fathers pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to give us a free nation. And today requires we do the same to keep it.